In today's episode, I spoke with Fenella, who is an NLP and hypnosis expert, and we got into lots of the wonderful benefits that everybody can have from NLP, hypnosis, and especially timeline therapy. It was a great conversation. I'm very grateful to her. Please check out the links in the description. And as always, if you can, please like, subscribe, and share the podcast. Much appreciated. Hello, and welcome to the David Watson podcast. And thank you for joining me. I do appreciate it. How are you today?
I'm very good, thank you, David, and thank you for having me.
No, you're welcome. And we were just having a brief discussion about your hat, should we say, because you've doing some publicity work and have a new hairstyle.
I do, yes, an extreme one that I had when I was 21 or 20.
I think you'll keep it.
Probably not. Probably not. No, I don't fancy keeping it like that because it's too much work, really, putting all the colours in. So
Yeah, that's true.
I'll chop it all off and then start all over again.
Are you going to go back to your original haircut?
Who knows? I may just have something that's a bit shorter because my hair used to be about shoulder length.
Because in the pictures that I've seen on your website and socials, it looks like you have quite thick curly hair.
I do, yes.
Yeah. So
I do. It's all gone. So that will come back and maybe even more curly.
It will grow back. And so, talking about your website and socials, you are actually specifically, how does it work? Because I was looking for you. Actually offer several things. It's not just like one session, the single session coaching, 4 monthly coaching, 12 monthly coaching, and you have one of the things I really enjoyed when I was looking at your website was that you make a very good distinction, I feel, between counselling and coaching, which
Yes.
Can we just sort of have a little chat about that, just sort of briefly first?
So counselling is really when people go over their past and talk it through. And essentially, when my personal belief is that counselling can serve early on when something happens for somebody, just as a way to make sense of things. And it's really important that people have the opportunity to make sense of things. Yet in the long term, all it serves to do is to wire in the experience again and again. So every time we think of a negative experience, we're bringing that memory into the present, and we're simply wiring it deeper into our neural networks. So essentially, coaching is future focused. Yep. I kind of do a bit of a combination because I do something called, I do kind of coaching therapy. So if it's required, I will clear the past very quickly with something called timeline therapy and sometimes hypnosis. Because in my belief as well is that if we don't clear the past, the unconscious mind will continuously represent it because that's what it wants all the time. Yeah. It's looking for completion. It's looking for resolution. And so by clearing all of that quickly without spending, because I'm not really interested in the story of the past, yet when I listen to it from the client just in one session, the pattern presents itself. And that's what I'm looking for, is the pattern that they're running to do what we call their problem that's holding them back. So once that's all cleared, then we can move forward and with more speed, essentially. So, yeah.
I was going to say, I like the how you describe the mind is looking for the completion.
Yeah.
Because that's kind of does actually sum it up very well, doesn't it? There is this part of our subconscious mind that is trying to resolve potentially future problems.
Yes, because we'll come up if we don't resolve old stuff, we'll come up with the future problems essentially. And if we resolve the old stuff which we've held on to, sometimes with the best, intention, because we say is every behavior stems from a positive intention in NLP, and there is a purpose for any old behavior, and that's often protection and safety. So people say, oh, well, I want to hold on to it, so if something like this happens again, I know that it's going to, I know it's happening. Whereas we say is that if you do that, if you keep holding on to something, it's just going to keep represent it, because essentially your what we call your reticular activating system is looking for that. It's looking for a match all the time. So when things happen, you'll slot it into your old behaviors as opposed to looking at it in a different way, because all behavior is reframable.
Yeah.
All our patterns are reframable.
So how did you get into the NLP and the hypnosis work?
Um, so my background, I worked with children originally when I left college. And I have a very strong passion around the fact that I think adult behaviors limit children. We crush children's imagination. We put our limitations on them. And so that my interest in psychology really started from there. And I'm very much into children learning through play and that ability to use our imagination, because we create everything through our minds. And then from there, essentially, I ended up doing personal training at one point. And there was this thing, it was like, well, why are some of my clients, not making headway? What is it that's really stopping them? And of course, it was their mind, is that they come to a session and it's all great. But what they don't do then is go and continue doing that afterwards. So very successful people in their, some very successful people in their jobs were then very unsuccessful, say, for example, in getting fit or losing weight or, what they wanted to do. So then, I think for a friend of mine, NLP just appeared. It had appeared a long time ago. I'd read a book about it, but done nothing about it. Then it appeared on the horizon again. And I just thought, that's what I have to do. That's the missing piece of the jigsaw puzzle. And actually it was. Everything fell into place when I did the training as a practitioner. And then the obvious thing for me was to go to do master practitioner. And then because I've been a trainer for plus 20 plus years, the next thing was to was to train as a trainer. So I also teach people to do what I do in terms of the skills that I have. Yeah.
To say that you have quite a few courses on your website.
Yes. Offering variety. It's all
Yeah.
about flexibility.
So if somebody was listening to this, what would you suggest how would you suggest they approach it? Not so much, I suppose the original question would be, what would they do? What should they learn first? But before they decided that, what way would you want them to approach it?
What way would I want them to approach
Yeah,
NLP?
yeah,
It's about people who, for example, NLP is all about replicating excellence. So it's essentially based on modeling. How do excellent people who have success in their lives, do what they do? And it's essentially a deconstruct of how our mind works. So for people who are looking to communicate with themselves better and other people, for people who are looking to develop their leadership skills, and personal development, essentially, because it really does, when somebody learns NLP, they go through all the processes of change themselves. So it's quite a transformative process. And it depends on whether people want a taster, which is
yeah,
the 2 day, which is very intense, because the way NLP is taught is very different from how we learn in school. So we learn in school consciously, and all learning behavior and change is unconscious. So I deliberately overload people's conscious mind, so that gets out of the way, and they go, oh, I can't be doing with this. And then they just let things go in. I teach people the learning state and things like that as well. Is essentially that's where our learning happens, and we just don't trust it.
yeah, yeah. No, I'd agree with that. So, because that you mentioned again about being at school and how it doesn't seem to, I suppose, for want of a better term and not trying to be too clumsy, doesn't meet our needs.
Yeah.
And I've heard about children through play before, and I'm always, I don't know if it's skeptical, cynical, or just don't have a clue what it really means.
In terms of children and play, the value of play.
Yeah, because funnily enough, I did a podcast recently, just a single podcast. So it was like a little short video where I said one of the things that our generation have, which I feel is an advantage, is that we learnt the ability and value of being bored, and
Yes.
that being a child when we were children, um, being bored was just something my niece, who's 12,
Yeah.
cannot comprehend.
Yeah.
She's no idea. It's just on her phone, whereas we would literally find something to do by staring at a wall for 4 hours.
Absolutely. We allowed our imagination
Hmm.
to be activated because it needs space, and because the children are having constant stimulation, or they're being ferried from after school club to activity to activity, they're missing out on essential aspects of their development. So what happens with play, because I still teach play work, because I'm so passionate about the value of it. Play is a precursor to learning in school. So for children to have free play, self-directed, intrinsically motivated, means that they will be ready, because children going to school far too early. They're sitting down, formal learning. They're labeled because they can't sit still, and they're not designed to sit still at that age. Children will learn through going out and exploring the world. And when they explore the world, what they'll do is they'll get stimulate response from the world. And that gives them a feeling of, literally, children have release barbiturates.
Yeah.
So the spinning, jumping, running encourages children to do more of it, because it's such an essential part of their development. And if you look at other mammals, is that they will play, even though they're quite vulnerable when they're playing in the wild. And so if play wasn't that important, it would have been evolved. Evolution would have got rid of it. It's essentially a massively important part as well for development of reflexes, development of the hindbrain called cerebellum in terms of movement. And also that's part of the cerebellum, because it has so many neurons in it. It's also has a language center in it. So it helps with language. So all of this helps children to be ready to actually learn in a more formal manner.
Yeah.
Because we're not doing that, children are less resilient. Children feel more anxious. And we don't allow children to take risks in the same way that we used to.
Oh,
And
definitely.
that really is to their detriment. It really is, in terms of long term. So we end up with children who are feeling more anxious, who are got all of these different labels and behaviors. And also because of the scrolling of the incessant social media, that decreases their ability to concentrate as well. So you were talking about being bored, is that space and that time in the mind just to be able to sit and allow the mind to go off on its own journey, essentially, rather than having to be continuously stimulated. So,
Because I often wonder, I mean, just a sort of clarification, because although my main job is head injury rehabilitation, like you, I am actually a hypnotherapist, and do therapy. And I originally, funnily enough, trained to be a counsellor, and then after I did my first exams, which I think is why I liked your definition of counselling versus coaching, because the reason I never carried on is like, you're not fixing anything, you're just going over old drama. And
yeah,
so I finished my first exams and never did my 500 hours or whatever it was back then, and
right,
and never
right.
never never finished the qualification. So it's just like, this isn't. I'd never be a good counsellor,
Mm,
because I constantly think, okay, it's time to move to a solution now. But I wonder how much of today's teenagers, children, and stuff moving forward, that going back to the boredom thing,
yeah,
is the one of the reasons they suffer so much with kind of like that anxiety crisis, that lack of ability to have, I don't know, self. I see it so many different things. I'm not really sure what
mm,
label should be put on it, whether it's self
mm,
confidence, low self esteem, anxiety. Just there's an uncertainty about them that I think we never had, because we would just get up and wander around the woods.
yes, absolutely. We would have that freedom to explore and roam, and then the world isn't as scary.
Yeah,
And we learn to manage risk. And when we learn to manage risk in terms of the playbook theory, it's compound flexibility. So what we get a stimulus, we get a response from the world, we get good feedback or bad feedback or whatever, and we learn, we problem solve, we build our confidence through problem solving, we then learn to take greater risks, and so on and so forth, and the spiral goes up, because then we'll be more prepared to try new things as well, because we've had that experimentation process. And the converse is true as well. If a child is in a low stimulating environment, which essentially social media is, because
Yeah.
it's just very single one direction, it's passive, then what happens is that the stimulus and the response, and then there's also, looking at other, judging themselves by what the curated feeds that they see, and so it kind of, the spiral goes down, and they have less ability to experiment. They're less confident. They're less feel like they don't. They're less able to take risks because they don't have that confidence. So yeah, whereas we were out in the woods climbing trees and doing different things and digging holes and maybe having accidents as well, we still survived.
Well, when I was saying wandering around the woods, and you were talking, one of the images that popped into my head is that moment that probably all of us of a certain generation captured, is when you're climbing a tree and you're not quite sure if you've actually gone too high.
Yeah, because you've got to get down again.
Yeah, that's right. And if you're with a group of people, you've got to try and act brave and
Absolutely,
either carry on climbing or come up with a reason to go down to the floor to have a conversation with
absolutely,
someone. And
absolutely.
but it
And
is.
that's what I did, because I used to run an adventure playground.
Oh, nice.
So that was, the best place with adults, I would think, for children to be. Even though, even that's environment, we change the dynamic of children playing just with adults there. It changes the dynamic unconsciously.
Yeah, because I see that when I've done things with my niece and stuff. That the awareness that you're there always seems to have them looking over their shoulder for you. You
Yeah.
know,
Whereas they're out in the woods with their friends and all different ages. It's not always great. Play isn't always great, but what children are doing is they're acting out their experience of the world. And it's a safer environment for them to do that. It's a more low stakes environment. So they're playing out what they see in their world and what they're feeling about the world, and then kind of learning about their world. And what adults tend to do at the moment, more often than not now, is they intervene when a child's having difficulties. They intervene, and what happens there is the child is missing out on the essential parts of the learning process. So
because
it's about being resilient.
yeah, because the other benefit of just sheer boredom when we were children is you became very motivated to try projects
Yeah,
that might take some time, and so that delayed, which is that term they love to use, a delayed gratification.
yeah,
Um, but for us, that was because you realised after moments of sort of hours of absolute boredom, you suddenly found great motivation to go and do something, even if it would take you a fortnight.
yeah. That was the ability, to concentrate in the deep work, which again is really very, very beneficial for development. And personally, I have very strong feelings around the labels like ADHD and all of the labels, lots of the labels that we have. And essentially, it's to do with the ability, the way the brain has become wired. And again, in NLP, we just see it as behavior, and all behavior can be changed because it's a pattern, and because the brain is neuroplastic, as we have
Yeah,
neuroplasticity. That's what kind of always makes me laugh, is that people understand that we have neuroplasticity, yet they believe they don't have it. So, for example, someone who isn't
so true. Yeah,
loses their ability to walk and then learns to walk again because they utilize different parts of their brain because it's so flexible. And then somebody else goes, well, but I couldn't do that. I'm different. It's like, how? You have the same neural pathways you can develop.
yeah.
So,
No, I see that with head injuries. That you can
yeah,
always tell you can tell a lot about who they were before the accident
yeah,
because some are just closed off, and people, oh, it's because of their head injury. No, it was their beliefs beforehand,
yeah.
and they are. So it's interesting with what you were saying about children and play and that type of therapy, because this has been known for a long time, and it's actually very hard to find any sort of psychiatrist, psychotherapist, or therapist that doesn't agree with it.
Yeah.
So why are we not doing it?
I have no idea, to be quite frank. Personally, I believe we don't value children in a Western society. I believe that we have people who are in the institutions who are so focused on the formal old school learning, that and they've lost that contact with, maybe they never had that experience in childhood, so they don't understand it literally. And I don't think that in our society we value the practitioners. We don't trust the practitioners. So, for example, teachers aren't able to teach because the curriculum is so restrictive and so full of paperwork. And Ofsted, and there are some really good Ofsted inspectors, yet the parameters within which they have to work often limit what they actually see and the value of what they see in terms of the practitioners. And the practitioners are all paranoid about getting a bad Ofsted
Yeah, that is
report.
true. That
Ofsted.
that is definitely true. There is this strange feedback loop that everyone's got caught in, where people are just petrified of being reported for something,
Yeah.
even if they know their hand on heart they're doing the right thing.
And my fundamental belief, and always was when I work with children, is the first thing I think to myself is, what's the benefit to the children? Who is at the centre here? I'm considering children. And if it's is it an adult agenda? If it's an adult agenda, basically I was like, I'm not doing it. And I would reframe it and find a way of explaining it, why it was beneficial to children and why what they were asking us to do was not going to happen.
So could we dip into a bit of timeline therapy as well?
Oh yes, definitely.
The floor is yours.
I love it. So timeline therapy, if you're a hypnotherapist, so hypnotherapy is a state of where somebody is listening to you talking in an induction, essentially taking them into trance, or they're going into trance as a result of listening to what you're saying. NLP, on the other side, is a bit more of a conscious process, and timeline therapy essentially bridges the gap between those two. So it's a conscious unconscious process. And it's a process of active imagination, because, as we say, everyone is making it all up. Everything we are imagining. We imagine everything. And I always say to my clients is, look around the room, and everything in this room, apart from the plants or anything natural, is a figment, was once a figment of someone's imagination, and then they made it real. And that kind of enables people to connect with the idea, because they say, oh, I'm making it up. And I say, good job. Good job that you're making it up, because it's a reframe. But we're also looking at essentially going back into the past to the first event. And the first event is always an event we don't remember, because we wouldn't be able to define something. For example, we remove old negative emotions like anger, sadness, fear, hurt, and guilt, and anything else the client mentions if we're doing the whole process. And we always do them in that order because of the energies of those emotions. So someone goes back and they're going to the first event, they won't be able to remember that first event, because everything else that they do remember is a significant emotional event. So as I say, it's a process of active imagination. And I talk to them about the first 7 years of life being a sponge and just absorbing everything uncritically. So we also do talk about generational and lifetimes, because generations, you can have memories passed through your genes as well. And also lifetimes, we don't know if that exists or not. For some people that connects with them, and you'd be surprised what people come out when they're going through the process, because I'm asking them to do the process unconsciously. So essentially it involves them going up on their timeline when they've elicited it, and they're doing a process in their head, either visually, with sound, kinesthetically, with feeling, however is right for them. And then when we get to looking at the event, they're always above their timeline. So we're detached from the emotion, because when we're in our emotion, we can't think of resources, we can't think of learnings. We're just embedded in that old emotion. And so they get lots of learnings from that. And that is the reframe, because going through that process, they start to feel differently about that memory or that first event. And then we'll go to what we call the quantum position, the mirror image reverse before anything happens. It's the metaphysical, whatever you like to call it, recognizing that quantum physics is about possibility. And so then from there, when we check, and then we'll go into the event and check the emotions again, and then we'll come back to the present, we'll test, we'll future pace. So what they're doing is essentially rewiring their thinking and practicing sort of future pacing. So they're practicing their new thinking in the future. And that's essentially timeline therapy. It's a pretty fast process, and it has incredible results. And the reason I use it a lot because it has such good results. There are a few people who don't necessarily connect with it, which is why I will use hypnotherapy instead.
Yeah,
Because
I did timeline therapy once in a group setting. I don't know if it's the same
it's
for
not the
in
same.
no. The one thing the two things I remember from it. One was a past life, which was I was a Catholic priest in France, but there was no learning from that I recall, other than I could see the inside of this church and I knew I was in France. And that really didn't surprise me, as I wrote a book about 10 years ago on reincarnation. So it's sort of like it plays into my thing.
Mm,
But the memory that I'd forgotten, that I'm not sure, it definitely had a significant impact on my life, but I'm not sure that even now that I've drawn up all the dots, if you know what I mean, is I remember having a conversation with a young kid called Stephen, and I'd have been about 11 years old and he would have been the same. And it was about a girlfriend that I had when I was about 11. And literally, you're talking about the transition from primary school to secondary school.
yeah,
And I probably only had this girlfriend, I don't know, for about 6 weeks or whatever. And this young kid, Stephen, was telling me, because me and this girl had now broken up. And at this point, if you'd have asked me, or pre this therapy, if you'd have asked me, I wouldn't have remembered who she was, because I didn't
yeah,
have any memory of this kind of, I'd have been, oh, yeah, that was a girlfriend, I guess. But I was 10, 11 years old. And the memory was, he was telling me how had gone to this new school and we'd gone to different schools. Um, that she was telling all these older boys that her and I weren't together anymore, which we weren't, and that I was a terrible kisser. And I remember the memory and the emotion I had was absolute humiliation.
yeah,
And then, as looking at that as an adult, I was just like, exactly what sort of 11-year-old knows how to kiss?
exactly.
So it's like the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. And then also that the context that came with that afterwards was I didn't know Stephen was even telling the truth.
Yes,
And
yes,
I don't know that she ever discussed me with anyone. I never witnessed anything, and I didn't even know who these guys were, and we never went to the same schools. But there was this deep rooted humiliation to do with this conversation about a
yeah.
girl that wasn't even my girlfriend anymore.
It just goes to show, how one thing can happen and can have a tremendous effect on how we move forward, essentially. We just embed that as make it at that point we create a limiting decision because we clear limiting decisions or limiting beliefs as well with timeline therapy.
It
So
made me wonder in kind of one of those things where because you do tend to ponder on these things for a few days, and you kind of develop new insights. It made me
yeah,
wonder over the years, did I hold back from things because I was worried about what people might think?
yeah, we can't tell. We can't
No,
tell.
no, no, I can't. But I was doing podcasts and stuff by the time of doing that therapy. But it did make me wonder, like, would I have done more much earlier if I because it was just the weird sensation of which was what was one of the things I will say to people if you do timeline therapy, which I highly recommend, is how in touch I was with how young, how that 11-year-old version of me, just how vulnerable and humiliated he felt.
Yeah, yeah,
I felt it all over again, but from
yeah,
the kind of the safety of being an adult male. It's like, actually, you don't have to worry about this time.
yeah.
But that little boy was petrified.
And I mean, I don't know because I've trained as a clinical hypnotherapist as well, so I do regression hypnotherapy, and that sort of similar sorts of things can happen when we do that too. people go back and recall a memory that hasn't, of which they were unaware. It's all there in our unconscious mind somewhere.
It is, yeah, it is. And I was definitely grateful that I was able to see it as the adult I am now,
Yeah,
and just like, wow, that little boy version of me for a conversation that he didn't even know was true.
yeah.
He just so embarrassed. I was so humiliated, embarrassed. It was just bizarre, you know.
And I suppose that's the thing around timeline therapy is the reframe. You go back as the adult and you're reframing it to recognize who you are now, really, or who you can be, and overlay that onto the negative emotion, and recognize that actually there's no need to hold on to it.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely. And moving slightly differently again, um, what are the benefits of or the differences between the different lengths of time that you offer your coaching?
So the one session, 90 minutes, essentially is for one issue, one problem that someone's facing. I've just booked somebody on for the end of the week. I don't do a lot of those. Generally, I have to be really clear that it is just one problem or it's a phobia, and
Yeah,
uh, and then I'll work on that because they're very quick. And then the 4 month essentially is the process of, I usually do timeline therapy with people. It's clearing all the past. I'll look at their values. We'll work on their values. We'll align their values and get to the point of it's clearing a few issues. And then the 7 month the process is either for people who maybe have something that's a little bit more lodged, a bit more deep seated, or they are not quite willing. So there's a secondary gain issue. Um, they're resisting letting go of something. But what we can also do is really then start looking forward and creating plans much more into the future as well. It's like how they're going to carry out their goal, how we're going to move forward with the goal. Because all of my clients in the 4 and 7 month session, the coaching program, is they'll write a goal and the goal is tested. The goal is there's a whole process in NLP to test goals, which is essentially like no other. I can work out what the limitations, exactly where the goal, people will work out exactly where the goal isn't really well formed. Because if it doesn't appeal to the unconscious mind, to all of the senses, if it's not really compelling, then it's not going to happen quite as easily. And once we have created a really compelling goal, and I know I'm going off on a tangent, then we put
because
it in the
I think
unconscious
that's,
mind.
sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, but because you said you're going off on a tangent, but it's actually that tangent I'm really interested in because people don't really understand. They project that they want this lifestyle, this life, this ability to have boundaries or decision making, etc., etc., and then they don't understand how they trip themselves up and
Yeah.
why that happens. And it's how that's kind of what I'm interested in, is how you connect that with your own coaching programs, because that thing you said, it doesn't matter what you want if the unconscious isn't on board of it. It's kind of like, nah,
Ain't
yeah,
gonna
well,
happen.
yeah, because it's just like, yeah, while you've got the energy, we'll sit back and let you do it, and then
Yeah.
yeah, then we're not going to help you.
And that's the beauty for me of NLP, is because it's all about pattern. We're working out the pattern. I'm listening to language really closely and then identifying the negative emotion or the limiting beliefs or the resistance and the secondary gain. And then when we work on those and clear those at the same time of creating goal, because some people, they find it really challenging to create that goal and they're resistant to it as well, because that's part of it. It's, I don't want to create a goal because then I'll have to do something to get to it. And so, we have to push gently and firmly, and get them to create that goal, and create a goal that is really, yeah. Because people say, well, I don't know, I've never had that, I can't imagine it. And I'm like, well, can you imagine a person who has got it? What would they be thinking? What would they be doing? What will you be seeing when you can, imagine what you can see when you've got this? And again, encouraging, that going back to the childhood, is encouraging the utilization of the imagination as well. Because again, I think that people very much step away from that, and it restricts their ability to create a future or conceive of a future that is anything more than what they actually have now, and recognizing, that recognize actually how magnificent they are, because that's my belief, and I have 100% confidence in my clients, because I know that they're going to, have that potential. We all have that potential. So, yes, the combination, depending on the order we go,
Yeah.
um, there's a combination. Goal setting is really, really important, because that's the part where we start moving forwards as well. They've always got an eye on the future, and we're activating the reticular, it's in their, we pop it in their unconscious mind. So we call them I call them 4-dimensional goals, because they're not just written on a piece of paper. They're not in someone's head. They're not just written on a piece of paper. They're tested, and then the process of putting them into their unconscious mind is a really quite a powerful process. Really connects kinesthetically, because again, I think people don't necessarily understand and think NLP is all about in the mind, and it's not. It's very much the mind is in the body. There's a mind-body connection.
I think that was
So
probably one of the most powerful things that I experienced when I learned to do hypnotherapy, because there was all this stuff I thought I knew and thought that I could control and could override by, like guided meditations, beliefs, affirmations, writing goals down, blah, blah. And it
yeah,
was that point of, if the subconscious isn't on board with it, you're just two people riding a tandem bike uphill and only one of you's pedaling.
absolutely. Yeah, the
And
elephant is driving the.
yeah, and as soon as you run out of energy, you're just going to roll backwards.
Yeah, and that's the other thing when we work on values as well. Identifying, because most people want to tell you what they think you want to hear, and also we're very good at kidding ourselves. So again, working with values, people have their hierarchy in different areas of life, their set of values, and so those are also tested to identify which way they're motivated. Primarily, are they motivated from moving away from what they don't want, or moving towards what they want? Because if they're strongly away from motivated away from what they don't want, same thing as you're saying is that once they get towards what they want, their motivation is right back there at what they don't want, and so it simply draws them back. And so what we do is that's why we just dig deeper and deeper and deeper and find out all those hidden things that people are hiding from themselves.
Yeah, it is funny, isn't it? People, they get caught in that sort of vicious, repetitive cycle,
Yeah.
and just they sort of, and they end up, especially, I find that because people will start. I don't know if it's a midlife crisis is the
Mm-hmm.
right term, but there seems to be a reflection point somewhere around the 30s and 40s where people look back and see these patterns and recognize patterns in their life, and then generally beat the shit out of themselves about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the silly thing, really, because the past is the past. And the past brought us to where we are now. And who knows? Some great things have happened. So yeah.
So I'm going to start finishing up soon, but there's two questions that I wanted to ask you, and the second one is a playful question. But the first one is, what what would you describe as something you've always done well, that you've done right
That I've done well.
or done right?
I've done right. Well, something I've always done well is, I would say, something totally out is art.
All right.
It's art, yeah. I've always done art really well. I went to art college, and I love that creativity, and I do it in some way, shape, or form, because I went from there to make jewelry and things. So I think, yeah, that's something I've always done well. I turn my hand to most things. Actually, thinking about it, I'm pretty adaptable, and I can turn my hand to a lot of things.
That's good. And do you see that in successful clients,
That they're adaptable.
or they recognize what they do right?
I think they can come to that. A lot of the time, I think people act, as you mentioned, is that they beat themselves up and they focus on the negative, and so it takes that process of going through the coaching where they start to realize all of the things that they actually do right. So,
Lastly, and this is the playful one, using your imagination, funnily enough, if you could be at any place in the world, any place, any time, what would you be doing? What vehicle would you be driving, and what music would you be listening to?
oh gosh, where would I be? I'd probably be somewhere in Colombia, because it's my second home. What to say? What car would I be driving? What vehicle?
Yeah, or you can swap it for what you'd be drinking if you don't drive or don't have a passion for cars.
Oh, I do drive. I don't really have a passion for cars. I'd probably be driving well, I'd be driving
Yeah.
a van that I could live in, and I would be listening to some dance music. I'm a raver.
Yeah, fair enough. Absolutely fair enough. That's brilliant. Thank you very much. I really do appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, David. It's a pleasure.